homeless boy, witnesses Charlotte secretly poisoning her husband William's soup at a café. He warns them, but his actions lead to a tense confrontation. The café's atmosphere shifts as Ethan fights to expose Charlotte's crime. When the truth is revealed, the room is stunned, and Charlotte's deceit is finally uncovered. On a warm weekend afternoon, the upscale cafe nestled in the heart of Manhattan exuded an air of calm and elegance. The tables, made of polished wood, were carefully arranged and sunlight streamed through large windows, casting a cozy, peaceful glow over the space. Billionaires, investors, and celebrities casually enjoyed their lunch, engaging in light conversations as if they were the only people in the world. At a table near the window, William Grant and his wife Charlotte sat across from each other. A steaming bowl of soup and a fresh salad sat between them, but the atmosphere around them lacked any warmth. William appeared lost in thought, his tired eyes staring off into the distance, while Charlotte was absorbed in her phone, completely ignoring her husband's presence. Outside, Ethan, a homeless boy with a gaunt face, stood quietly, gazing through the window. His eyes followed the rich meals and lively conversations inside, but he was never a part of that world. While the cafe remained filled with an air of tranquility, a strange scene began unfolding just beneath Ethan's watchful eyes. He stood quietly outside, his gaze fixed on William and Charlotte at their table. Everything appeared normal at first, but as William lifted his spoon to his lips, Ethan suddenly noticed something unsettling. Charlotte, his wife, seemingly absent-minded, opened her handbag gently. No one noticed, not even William, who was absorbed in his phone. With a swift motion, Charlotte pulled out a small vial, one that seemed to hide something suspicious inside. Ethan, standing just a few feet away from the cafe, watched as she casually poured the strange liquid into her husband's steaming bowl of soup. The liquid seemed to disappear instantly, blending seamlessly with the soup. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, his body frozen in disbelief. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had just witnessed something deeply wrong. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine as he stood still, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Charlotte, the seemingly perfect woman, showed no signs of remorse or hesitation. She gave a small smile, her gaze never leaving William, as though everything was in her control. Ethan's eyes darted around, desperately hoping to find someone who might notice what was happening, but all around him, the cafe's patrons were oblivious to the scene unfolding just a few feet away. Laughter and conversation continued without interruption. The clinking of silverware filled the air as if nothing was amiss. It was as if he were invisible, a mere shadow among the well-dressed, wealthy crowd. The loneliness Ethan had carried with him for so long deepened in that moment. He knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing, but a wave of helplessness swept over him. He was just a homeless kid. Who would believe him? Who would listen to a child who didn't even belong in this world of luxury and privilege? And yet, despite the crushing weight of doubt, Ethan knew this was a critical moment, a moment that could change everything. But would he have the courage to act, or would he remain on the outside, watching the lives of others unfold without ever having a chance to make a difference? The moment Ethan yelled, "Don't eat that!" all eyes in the cafe turned toward him. The atmosphere shifted, thickening with tension, as silence enveloped the space. Charlotte turned around, her face contorted with fury, her composure shattered. The diners murmured among themselves, but Charlotte ignored them, her focus entirely on Ethan, her eyes cold and sharp, as if she were ready to rip him apart. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small key, her long fingers tracing its shape before lifting it to Ethan's face. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, barely audible over the hush that had fallen across the room. "If you dare ruin my life, I will make you regret it," she hissed, each word slicing through the air like a knife. Ethan froze, the threat hitting him like a sudden wave of cold water. The chill of her words sank deep into his chest, leaving a knot of fear tightening around his heart. He could feel the cold metal of the key so close to his face, a symbol of the danger she represented. But as the fear rushed in, something else stirred within him, a feeling of defiance, of refusal to back down. For a brief moment, the weight of her threat made him hesitate, but then something inside him snapped. He couldn't let this moment pass. He couldn't walk away and pretend he hadn't seen what he knew to be wrong. Charlotte was ruthless, no doubt about it, but this was a line he couldn't let her cross without standing up. With a deep breath, Ethan straightened, his fear melting into resolve. He took a step closer to William's table, not sure of what would happen next, but knowing one thing for sure, he couldn't let this slide. Charlotte could try to intimidate him, but Ethan wasn't going to stay silent. This was his chance to do something right, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. William Grant stared at Ethan, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. The boy's words hung in the air, like a heavy fog he couldn't quite dispel. "Don't eat it," Ethan had shouted, but could it really be true? Could Charlotte, his polished and graceful wife, be capable of something so sinister? The thought gnawed at him, but he couldn't bring himself to believe it. After all, what did a homeless child know about his life? What did he have to gain from causing trouble at a fancy cafe? As the seconds ticked by, William's gaze flickered toward Charlotte, seeking reassurance, but instead of the calm composure he'd come to expect from her, there was something else in her eyes, something cold, defensive, the briefest flicker of guilt, or was it just his imagination? The doubt in his mind grew, but it was fleeting, overshadowed by his skepticism. Still, the knot in his stomach tightened. The tension was almost unbearable. Then, as if to further cloud his thoughts, William's phone rang. His business partner's name flashed on the screen. The timing could not have been worse. The call was urgent, demanding his attention. William knew it was important, something about a high-stakes deal that could elevate his business to new heights, but also required an immediate response. He glanced back at Ethan, the boy's eyes locked on him with a piercing intensity. Was this a distraction, a game, or was it real? The longer William hesitated, the more it felt like he was teetering on the edge of a decision that could define the rest of his life. His thoughts were a whirlwind, pulled in two directions at once. On one hand, the business deal was too important to miss. On the other, something about the boy's voice, the earnestness in his plea, made it impossible to dismiss completely. Charlotte was watching him, waiting for him to make a decision, her gaze now hard, impatient. The ringing of his phone grew louder in his ears, and the pressing urgency of the call sliced through the tension like a sharp blade. But even as he reached for the phone, William couldn't shake the feeling that he might be overlooking something crucial. His gut twisted with uncertainty. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Could he risk ignoring Ethan's warning, or was he about to make the biggest mistake of his life? Charlotte turned around, her eyes shooting daggers at Ethan. She walked toward him, each step making the situation more dangerous. "Who do you think you are, ruining everything I've built?" Her voice dripped with hatred, every word like a sharpened blade cutting through the tense air. Her face was pale, but the fear was replaced with intense fury. Her dark hair swayed with each stride, and her once beautiful face now appeared menacing, like a cornered animal ready to strike. Ethan stood still, not backing down. He didn't fully understand everything, but he knew one thing for sure. If he didn't act now, something terrible would happen. His heart raced, his hands trembled, but he couldn't stand there and watch someone innocent be harmed. Charlotte's eyes locked onto his, as if she wanted to crush any hope he had left. The tension escalated when a middle-aged customer sitting near the window stood up and asked loudly, "What's going on here? Why is this kid shouting?" His question drew everyone's attention to the standoff between Charlotte and Ethan. Why does this kid think he can yell like that? His words weren't just curious. They carried an edge of criticism. The whole cafe suddenly felt the shift. Chairs scraped against the floor, and people turned to look. Whispers filled the air, and eyes darted between Charlotte and Ethan. The atmosphere turned heavy and thick with uncertainty. The once comfortable setting now seemed cold and filled with unease. Charlotte stood tall, her hands clenched into fists, while Ethan remained unmoving, fully aware of the eyes now trained on him. The weight of judgment hung in the air, and the tension between them was palpable. The stakes had risen, and everyone in the cafe could feel it. William, now feeling an unsettling suspicion, couldn't shake the growing doubt. He decided to take action, requesting that a sample of the soup be sent for testing. As he waited for the results, Charlotte's behavior became increasingly erratic. She glanced around nervously, her eyes darting from table to table as if afraid someone would catch on to her. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her designer handbag, quickly retrieving a small device and attempting to hide it with a swift motion. Ethan, watching from the corner, noticed Charlotte's anxiety and the subtle furtive movements she was making. The tension in the air was palpable, and he knew that if he didn't act soon, the truth would remain hidden. In a split second, he made a decision. He moved toward a chair near Charlotte, and with one forceful shove sent it toppling toward her. The loud crash of the chair hitting the floor echoed throughout the cafe, startling everyone and forcing Charlotte to stop what she was doing. The room fell silent. Every eye in the cafe turned toward Charlotte, and she froze in place, her panic barely concealed. The sudden commotion had interrupted her attempt to hide the truth, and for a brief moment, she was caught off guard. Ethan stood still, eyes fixed on her, his heart pounding. The unexpected chaos had momentarily shifted the attention away from him, and for the first time he felt like he had a chance to expose the truth. The tension in the air was thick, and the moment felt like everything was on the verge of being revealed. Finally, when everything seemed to reach its peak, the results from the soup test came in. William sat in silence, waiting with an indescribable tension. The mix of worry and confusion made it nearly impossible for him to stay calm. Suddenly, a server entered the room, holding the results in their hand. Their eyes met briefly before the server spoke, each word feeling like a heavy sentence. "We tested the soup, and indeed, there is a strong poison in it." The announcement echoed through the cafe, freezing the atmosphere. The entire room fell into a stunned silence, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Eyes shifted nervously between each other before finally settling on Charlotte, who was sitting across from William. She wavered, her body collapsing into her chair, her face drained of color, her eyes wide open in sheer terror. It was all too clear now, and in that moment Charlotte realized she couldn't escape. The tension in the room grew even thicker when another staff member quickly entered, whispering something to a waiter before rushing out. Moments later, the door swung open and a police officer stepped inside, his demeanor serious and commanding. All eyes turned toward the officer, but no one could have anticipated that he had been alerted to the situation through a secret call from a customer in the cafe. The customer, who had been quietly observing Charlotte's suspicious behavior, had called the police, concerned about what might unfold. As Charlotte noticed the presence of the officer, her face drained of any remaining color. She knew in that instant that there was no way out. Everything she had done was finally catching up with her. The moment had come, and justice was about to take its course. This unexpected turn of events marked the end of Charlotte's elaborate scheme, and the truth was about to be fully exposed.